your soul. Yo, half the story has never been told. Ladies, you got to demand what you want, and what we want is respect, right? Yo, just sit up on the track, I know so you have to feel with it right. Freedom every time for the sisters. Check this. Watch this.
And here we go now. Listen, if I'm boom boom rule, I be the ruler like Slick Rick. Get with this quick-witted Adidas wearing chick. Papa got a brand new bag. Mama got a brand new Jag. Or go tag. I ain't no old hag. I represent not only in the kitchen, in the bedroom, but also in the boardroom. So give me more room. Deny my opportunity. You in jeopardy. Yo, set me free. Don't hinder me. Let me be.
I'm fighting for freedom. I got the heat in case you need them. Straight soldier. Ain't nobody told ya. Hold up on them lies. I know your games and your plans.
Hello and happy Easter to one and all. Welcome to the Book Slam Extra. I'm your host, Jules. Happy Sunday. I'm sorry there was a few technical issues. For some reason it wasn't actually working when I was clicking on the buttons. I do hope you have had a wonderful Easter Sunday. We have got a 4-day weekend in the UK over here, which is wonderful. And so I hope all my fellow UK people are enjoying that. And if you are eating Easter eggs, even better. So whether you're religious or not, Easter's a great time because it also then means you get to eat lots of chocolate, you get to do Easter egg hunts, you get to spend time with family, eat lots of nice food, and it's just a nice season all round. Now, it's a nice season in the sense that it's also given us inspiration for the topic for today's discussion, which is we're talking about life and death. Now, the reason why life and death is so interesting is because it's obviously a natural order of things in life, but also it's a natural progression. At some point, things will die. And I thought it's quite poignant this time of year as well. So I'm an author of dark fantasy, sword and sorcery, science fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons type things. I write stories for both adults and children, with an element of looking at mental health and recovery from trauma as the main central theme. I've written 4 books. I've got 3 more on the way, and yeah, they're really cool. So I'm just going to bring on our lovely co-host and welcome him.
Hello.
Hi, Adam. Hello. Sorry, this it's not doing what I wanted to do. I'm clicking on things and it's just like going, and it's just Sunday. What do we to do?
We're good.
How are you?
Hi. Yeah, I'm good. It's noon here and it's rainy where I am in Easter, but we're not celebrating anything. We're not doing anything. So I'm excited to be here for the book slam. That's what I'm doing.
Nice.
Well, I suppose I should introduce myself.
Nice meal today.
Oh, did you? Oh, that's lovely. That's good. Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. So, hi, everybody. I'm Adam Andrews Johnson. I have published these 2 books, The Mantis Variant and The Mantis Equilibrium. And Jules is releasing my giant epic novel through her publishing company, Danu Books, next year, hopefully around the beginning of 2024. And she writes for youth and adult. I only write for mature people, apparently. My stuff is terrifying and horrible in the Mantis stories, and it's really sexy and overly graphically erotic in the other book is called The Starting End that Jules is releasing. So my stuff's all very mature, but yeah, we love it here and we love everybody, and so we're glad to have some guests tonight with us, and yeah, it's gonna be great.
It is really good, and I think as well that I don't know about you, as you write more, your writing gets better. But it's quite interesting where inspiration comes from, isn't it? It doesn't sort of automatically happen to exist in your mind. Sometimes you have to work at it a little bit, or have a writing buddy, which we've talked about on here before, and that's a really good way of being able to actually get past a particular scene. Like I had a scene in my book that I'm in the process of still writing, but I'm tweaking it at the moment. But I had a conversation with you, and actually we were talking about something completely different, and you said one thing. I think it was one word you said, and it completely sparked a whole plethora of ideas. So So
Marvelous.
good.
Yeah. And because writing is so
Now-
isolated most times, it is really good to have that other person to bounce ideas off of once in a while, at least. Yeah.
And also, that's another reason why we do this, isn't it? Because whilst it's it's great to actually be able to do a podcast and talk about books and talk about our stories, this is also about building a community of people who can get together, share ideas, work and support each other. That's why I started the Discord.
Mhm.
And any author that comes on here is invited automatically onto the Discord. They don't have to accept it; they don't want to, but it's just a nice space, and that's what I want it to be. It's a completely unique space that is just for writers, authors, and poets, and beta readers. If you like the beta readers, it's got some
We
very
do.
good reviews on it. You've been really helpful with everyone who sent their work over, which is amazing. Okay, so Adam, what's your thoughts about the theme that we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, so life and death. Well, that's an interesting topic because in the starting end, my fantasy novel that you're releasing, one of the things that makes my story unique is that time isn't passing in the starting end. So no one is born, no one grows, no one ages, and no one dies. People can get killed, and that's part of the tragedy in my story that they have to deal with, but there's no death. So I had to figure out what would happen to the dead bodies if they got killed. And so I've got this whole subculture of people, I guess you'd describe them, that deal with dead bodies when people are killed, because most people are we think of ourselves as not really used to dealing with death because, even if you're a meat eater, you're very separated from the food, but we are so separated. And in my world, they are so much further separated from death that they can't handle it. Anytime somebody dies and there's a body around, they flee. And part of it is that the people who come and collect the dead will also collect the living if anybody's around the living or around the dead. So that's a whole crazy thing that I've developed for my world. And so that kind of I don't really have a good answer for that with that particular book because it's kind of unique. But I do love that whole world building of high fantasy and creating something crazy like that where nobody is dying. That was a fun thing to create, and I wrote a 600-page.
Very unique. my editor, I'm giving it to in segments rather than anyone go. It's a fascinating concept actually. Getting rid of death or people dying from things unless they're
From
murdered.
disease, from age,
It's quite interesting because in a way that's what a lot of people here actually want, isn't it? To have an ageless life. You've got this stories as old as time where you've got the youth of I can't even speak today. The fountain of youth, and people seeking out to try and find that so that they can live forever. And it is, there's strong concepts in every story. Your Mantis variant though has got, your Mantis series, I should say now, it's got quite a lot of death, hasn't it?
A lot of death.
Slightly different.
Yeah. There's almost a good chance that if you're reading something that's sort of okay in that book, that something horrible is about to happen. That's usually a good sign. The very first book, my Mantis variant book 1, actually starts with a human sacrifice and the killing of a child and a whole ritual on somebody's birthday. So it's all about celebration, and they're in a cult, so it's very super ritualistic and it's crazy and terrible. And I've read the first a few times, and I always stop when it gets really gross because it gets gory and it's a little much. But what about your world? What about with Ray? How is life and death and birth and everything celebrated or recognized in your world?
So in actually, I'll get the books here. So in book 1 of Thorns and Demons, it actually starts off with a close family friend who's really sick, and from a child's eyes, you get to see how, because Ray's the only one who can read, because reading has been outlawed as a historic thing. If you're interested in finding out more about it, then hook into the anthology that I'm writing, because it will explain why Reece has been out on. And the woman who's poorly has given some clues in the tomes that Ray is able to read. And it kind of starts off with her trying to figure it out and trying to save this woman's life. And in the process, then, like, a very short space of time, she has, lots of people dying who are close to her. And she's only 16, and it's how does she deal with that? How does she manage that? And actually, in a way, what happens to her after that makes those deaths almost insignificant at the time, because she's trying to deal with the trauma that actually happens to her when she's in captivity. And so obviously those original deaths play out as she ages and start to haunt her.
Because she's gone through basically like a secondary trauma where other people have died, and then suddenly she's thrust into her own trauma that's become her central focus. So she's never gotten to get over it. Wow, that's strong. Yeah.
So she ends up getting held. So there's like child soldiers that are being, children are being captured in order to then create this whole army of soldiers, and she gets captured, and she has to. She tries to escape, but whilst she's in that captivity, she gets abused horribly, and it's that abuse that becomes the central trauma that she's dealing with, and so the deaths become an insignificant event, even though they are still present, and so they do tend to sort of stick around. Because I think one of the things that I find really difficult is, you see films where or read a book where a death's happened and the character's just like, it's really sad. And then the next scene, it's like it's never happened. And they've got on, they're fine, there's no issues. And it's just like, that's so unrealistic. That doesn't happen in real life. So
I put a lot of effort. There's an important death in this book. Not the child sacrifice at the beginning. It's important in its own way, but the death in that book, after it happens, I realized there's a lot of. I thought that was going to be sort of like a good ending point for the book, but I realized there's so much that I have to tell about everybody going through the grief that I wrote this fairly long chapter. That's sort of the end where they're all celebrating their loss of their friend. And then I wrote 4 more chapters explaining what they all do after that, because they're not done dealing with their grief. It just kept going. So there's 5 more chapters at the end of the book that I didn't intend in the beginning, but realized were important for the reader to deal with those emotions that the characters are going through.
That's really interesting, because you've kind of looked at it from like an actual thing that would happen. People's lives don't just suddenly stop when a death has occurred. It just changes the course of their path, and it can have a lasting effect in whatever way.
Whether that's an immediate or long term,
yeah. And I think also for me, share something really personal, that I had a difficult relationship with my grandma. And I loved her to pieces when I was a child, but then through various events, it became a difficult relationship to work with. And she ended up passing away when she was 96, and she actually died alone. And I've never really grieved at all for her, as cold and heartless as that sounds. And I think that's possibly where some of my interest in, death and grief and how it affects different people and things like that has kind of come from, where it's like, how can you, maybe I grieved for who she was when she was already alive, when she was still alive. And at that point, I did that grief. So when she had gone, she had already gone in my eyes,
This is a very similar story. Yeah, no, what you're saying is actually a very similar story to someone else I know who lost someone close to them and had fallen into a very, very bad point in their relationship before that, and the person didn't feel like they grieved when they died. But that's a great way to describe it, that maybe you and this other person both already grieved the loss of that person. So losing them physically was already something you dealt with, sort of. That's so interesting.
Yeah, it was that emotion. Yeah, it was that emotional loss that I felt, and I think it was that emotional. I think it was that emotional. The difficulties. The situation was really tricky, and I think at the time I had emotionally done that grieving. So it was more just the physical form that was left. And I know that some people are going to think, oh, that's really horrible and cold, you know, but the situation was a difficult one. So,
I think every person that we know and who we lose, we will grieve in a different way. I felt very differently for all four of my grandparents when they passed away. I was an adult for all of them, and I felt very differently for each one. So that's just a thing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think grief is a very personal thing, and I get very frustrated when I hear people saying they can't be grieving because they've not got tears down their face. And it's just like, because some people just don't grieve like that. Some people don't show emotions through tears. Some people hold on to their emotions internally. So yeah, I think it's really an interesting topic, you know, to include in your stories, and it really drives the protagonist and the other characters forward, and it changes who they are and enables us to make changes accordingly. So shall we invite our lovely guest authors on?
I think we certainly should. Yes.
Let's do it. Hang on a second. I have to do it one at a time, I think. Hello. Welcome.
Hi, friends. Welcome.
Howdy.
How are you doing? Oh, we've got Melanie as well. Sorry to interrupt. Melanie's in and out.
One more. Hi, Melanie.
I'll try
Almost. We've got updates on the live stream program has got some updates, so we're dealing with it. We're figuring it out. But yeah. Hi, Melanie.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm glad to see I'm not the only one in the car.
That's okay.
It's like the best studio, isn't it?
I'm glad to be able to join you guys. So, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You're cutting out a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
You're cutting in and out.
I'm in the country, so I'm gonna dip out.
Oh, okay. Oh, we love you, Melanie. Thanks for joining us for a moment. I love Melanie. Well, so Tom, why don't you start? You've been on the show once before. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your writing, and yeah, where we can get it. Tell us where we can get your work. Always.
For sure. Okay, so my name's Tom, or TM Baldwin if you're looking for my handle. And I have written 5 novels so far in a series called the Magicium series. As you can tell by my accent, I'm an Australian, but don't hold that against me. So yeah, here are some of my books. I won't make quite the big deal and big fuss. Oh, that one's shiny. Oh, look at that. Ooh.
There's no
Most of the rest are in matte finish at the moment. But yeah, these are some of my books. You'll see a common motif there on a Medusa-looking character who's one of my many antagonists. And yeah, the Magicium series, it's essentially about what happens if we discover that there's actually a scientific reason behind the weird stuff that happens sometimes in our world. And so, yeah, exploring that and exploring what that means, exploring what happens when people lose that knowledge and lose that understanding. And yep, all my books are on Amazon, and book 6 is about halfway through. It's been a bit of a challenge to write, but I'm feeling like I'm starting to get on a roll with it now. So that's very exciting.
Good. Well, we like discussing writing blocks and all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah, if you got any issues, we'd be happy to talk about those at some point too.
Absolutely. Well, then my people will talk to your people. We'll do lunch.
Great. Larry, would you like to introduce yourself as well? Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, my name is Larry. I write under the name of Saddle Tramp 1956. That's a take. Actually, that's the name of my favorite Charlie Daniels album that came out back in the 70s. It was Saddle Tramp, and that was one of my favorites. So I just adopted that as my pen name. I've got 4 ebooks on Amazon now, and I've got 218 free stories on Literotica and a few other sites, Stories Online, Medium, and a few others. It's interesting that you picked this particular topic of life and death, because one of my personal favorite characters and a favorite for a lot of my readers is a fella by the name of Justice O'Peace. And he was actually a Civil War soldier who was shot at the Battle of Brown's Mill in July of 1864, and that was an actual battle. And I went and I took a look at how that battle took place, and I was able to work that into my story. Anyway, my first ebook was called Justice Rides, and it tells the story of how Eli Jones, who was a sergeant in the 8th Regiment of Indiana Cavalry, which, by the way, was an actual unit that was at that battle. There were 2 companies of that.
We like historical details. We like that stuff.
Yeah, well, I did quite a bit of research, and I found that there were actually 2 companies that were in the advance guard. That was all part of General Sherman's march to the sea. And this came before Sherman decided to lay siege to Atlanta. His hope was that he could draw the Confederates out of the city and deal with them out in the field without having to lay waste to the city. But that didn't happen. And as it turns out, the guy who really messed things up for Sherman was a guy named Stoneman, who, by the way, after the war became the 16th governor of the state of California. So anyway, Eli Jones, the story starts out with Eli Jones reading a letter from his wife in Indianapolis, and they come across the Confederates, and he gets shot, and that's the first scene of the book. Is him laying there, dead on the road, as his life blood is pouring out of him. And the next thing he knows, he learns that he's been recruited by an immortal being named Adrestia Ramnusia, which, by the way, is the name of the Greek goddess of justice and retribution. And she plays a prominent role in quite a few of my stories. And so does he. Anyway, the whole book, Justice Rides, is about how he makes that transition from this mortal being named Eli Jones with a wife and 2 kids in Indianapolis to an immortal avenger who helps Adrestia get justice for those who deserve it. And there are 2 historic events that take place in that book that actually happened. One, of course, being the Battle of Brown's Mill, and the other one being the 1896 Wichita Falls bank robbery. And this was during the time that Eli served in the Texas Rangers under a fellow named William Jesse McDonald, who was, again, an actual character. And he was quite an interesting character in his own right. There was a newspaper article that once said that he would probably charge the gates of hell with a bucket of water if he could. So anyway, I managed to work all of that into that little ebook, and so I find this topic quite interesting. It just happened to segue right into a lot of my stories. So
amazing.
Yes, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, do you consider it like historical fiction or alternate history or mystical history, or how do you sort of like label it?
Well, it's kind of a cross mix of all of the above, really, because there are some events that never actually happened, like the justice taken out on a town called Lone Pine, which, to my knowledge, never existed. But
it might have been destroyed. We just don't know about it now. I see.
That's right. Yeah. That's it. There you go. So it's a little bit of all of it. There's a lot of things in this story, and I wanted to put in some things that actually happened to kind of give the story just a tad bit of credibility.
That's wild.
Even though the theme of the story is way outside the realm of possibility, so far as we know, anyway. I hope. Well, once we've chatted a little bit more, we'd love to hear you read some of that, or any of your work. I mean, that sounds excellent. All of it, yeah. Tom, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the more in-depth story or characters in particular?
Yeah, sure. So again, I guess like Larry, my series has a lot of these themes are really important in my series as well. The importance of grief, like Jules was talking about before, and how people process it in different ways and manage it in different ways. Because mine's dystopian fantasy, it's a fairly brutal sort of society, and so death is expected. Unlike what Adam was describing in his, death is expected, and so there's often a cold brutality to it. But like with all things, different people have different reactions, and so for some, this is a much more powerful and distressing thing. So one of my main characters, Logan, he during the course of the series, he loses his mother and his father, and because of the different relationships he had with them, it impacts him in such different ways. His father dying, for which he's indirectly responsible, is almost a relief because of how fractured their relationship was. Whereas when his mother dies, it nearly breaks him, and he struggles to function. And what's interesting is, in the time between his mother dying, who dies first, and his father dying, he learns a lot more about his mother, and suddenly his grief doesn't have the purity it used to have before. And so that's really interesting for him to then face up to the fact his mum wasn't the perfect person who he had imagined she was. So there's another character who deals with grief in very different ways. So in a very different way, Junior is another of my MCs, and he and I'll read a little bit from him today, but he goes to a garden because he's a leader. He sees himself as a leader in a brutal world. He sees himself as responsible for kind of each and every death that occurs, because he should have done more, and he struggles to manage the guilt of that. And so he's got this garden of guilt, this metaphorical garden of guilt that he escapes to try to process and work through what that all means, and how he can forgive himself for the mistakes that he's made. And it's not till kind of the end of book 5 that he really starts to get a handle on that.
Wow. And your books are pretty long. They're
they're pretty long.
Story you're going through. Okay.
Yeah. There's kind of the first one's 150,000 words, but then after that you're pushing up towards 200,000. So
yeah, so it's a lot of story to get through for his dealing with these traumas. Wow.
Yeah.
And so, how's the Medusa involved? Are there mythical creatures, or remind us? I know you told us something.
So one of the big things that we did, I will go into a little more detail, since I'm sure there are new viewers. And hi everyone, it's great to be here. Hope you're already enjoying the great stuff that we're all talking about. You're welcome, guys. So one of the things about my story is I look at the way that we waste resources. And so when we discover this amazing thing, this magician, this chemical element that we can do magical stuff with, we don't use it for good things. We don't use it for solving the hunger crises around the world, or for doing something about making sure we've got enough energy. No, we use it on frivolous stuff, because we tend to be wasteful. with the resources we have. And so one of the frivolous things we do is people get excited about the idea of, oh, we can produce our own kind of mythical creatures. And so that's what people do in their own countries. They create mythical creatures, and well, that's only going to end well because most mythical creatures want to kill humans in the books I've read. And so at some point the mythical creatures turn on them. What was your question again, Adam? I was going somewhere with this. I've totally lost it.
Medusa.
Oh, Medusa. Yeah. Okay. So, thank you. And so the Medusa character is someone who once this all kind of goes down and humanity's shoved underground and all the rest of it, the Medusa character, her name's Mistress, she becomes the Medusa character because she decides that she's the one who kind of led these, what they call abominations, the mythical creatures, to rebel because of her own bitter and twisted desires. And she makes it look like she's one of them by actually having Medusium surgery done to her to attach the snakes to her hair to say, I'm a human who wants to become one of these abominations so that I've got more kudos to lead them, I suppose. And so that's where she comes into the story. So she is the primary antagonist, but yeah, there are a bunch of antagonists, and I really, like most of us, I think you really value that ability to create great characters. Even Mistress, we see some of her good qualities, despite the fact that she's a horrible, evil tyrant. And I try to do that with all of my characters to show there's no absolute evil or absolute good in these characters. They're all a mix of the two.
I like that dichotomy. I think that's really important, that the both sides of it. And I've got a question about her. Once she goes through the magic and gets the Medusa snake hair, does she actually have significant control over the monsters that have been created, or is
she does. Yeah, she does. Okay, so one of the interesting things about these characters is about even the mythical creatures is they recognize they were created. And so there's still a strange, uncomfortable honor that they hold for their creators, even though they feel their creators have abused them. There's still that. It kind of, it almost mirrors, I suppose, an abusive relationship with a parent or something like that. That they still have this attachment. So, for instance, the goblins that were created, they very much want to imitate humans. They don't want to be humans, but they keep imitating them. They keep trying to grow more and more human, and that's part of what they want to achieve to honor the creators who they had, for example. And so the Medusa character, and having human and abomination, is just the perfect, storm for them, the perfect person to be able to lead them into whatever that future might hold. And it's actually, that idea has really fueled what I'm doing in book 6 now, and sort of given me direction when I was feeling a bit blah about it. Gluff is a word, by the way, if anyone was wondering.
Technical term.
I've seen that word.
You got to write it down. But sorry, what was that, Larry?
I said I've seen that word before, by the way.
Yeah, usually a speech bubble next to my head, probably. But anyway,
I love the usage of mythology. I've got mythology in my book as well. I've got a whole range of creatures from across different cultures, so it's not just Western mythology. But I've also got lots of war and battles going on in my books, and I really love like both your styles and sort of the themes that you've got. I love alternate history or history that's got twists in it, because particularly when it's to do with war and battle, I find it fascinating. War as a concept, I find really interesting. Not glorifying, but just I find it a really interesting thing that people will kill for someone else for something that they're never going to have, and be able to, follow orders and go into battle with a chance of not coming out of it, but then not gaining anything from it either, apart from problems. And so I really love both your sort of like your concepts. It's really good. I'm really excited to listen to both you reading. Obviously not the same
Yeah.
time. That would be weird.
Me too. Yeah.
Could be fun, chapter by chapter.
So we need
Now,
more
would you
details
like
about.
to go first?
Oh yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah. We'll ask more questions later. Yeah. Larry, you want to read some?
Sure.
Okay.
fact,
I guess I should tell you how we do this. We normally will have just the reader pop on the screen by themselves.
Okay.
We'd love for you to introduce yourself again. Tell us the name of the work you're going to read, and then read for about 10 minutes. Oh, and let us know where to get it, if it's on Amazon or all the different websites or wherever.
Right.
And then read for maybe 10 minutes or whatever feels good, and then just let us know when you're done. Just say, okay, that's it, whatever, and we'll pop right back on the screen. Okay.
Okay. Well, actually, I have a couple of passages that I would like to read, if that's okay.
Sorry, what's that, Jules?
Cool. I know. I said you can read until you feel that you've read enough. You don't have to stop at precisely 10 minutes. But
there's no limit.
Yeah, 2 passages.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of passages that I'd like to read.
Has limits, doesn't it?
And so anyway, let me if I could, I'll go ahead and reintroduce myself here. My name is Larry. I write under the pen name of Saddle Tramp 1956. Most of my work is at Literotica. However, I do have 4 ebooks on Amazon right now, and if you search for Saddle Tramp 1956, you'll find them. My first one is called Justice Rides, and it's a story of how Eli Jones became the Avenger known as Justice O' Peace. And to give a little background, when I started writing this, I've always been something of a history buff, especially around the Civil War. And so I did a little bit of research. And so some of what you're going to hear or read in that pretty much echoes some of what the way people fought back in those days. It was a little bit different. If you ever want to read something that'll bring a tear to your eye, just read some of the letters from the soldiers on either side of that war, and you'll get a little idea of how they were. Anyway, so I'll start with the first part of this. Brown's Mill. Elijah Jones, Eli, to his friends and family, wiped the sweat off his forehead with an already soaked bandana. The southern states were beautiful but sweltering in summer, nothing like his native Indiana. It was nothing like the dry heat in South Texas, where he lived with his wife, parents, and 2 brothers for several years. He pulled out the metal case Lizzie gave him before he left Indianapolis and read the inscription on the back. To my dearest Elijah, may God keep you safe and bring you back to your one true love, your loving wife, Elizabeth. Eli opened the case and pulled out a hand-rolled cigarette. Lighting it with a stick from the small campfire before him, he took a drag as he looked at the picture inside. It was a photo of him and Lizzie taken during happier times. He thought of the last time he saw her, the last time he felt her small, soft, smooth skin against his. Lizzie was always so prim and proper in public, but she was a wildcat in bed. He loved running his hands through her long blonde hair as he immersed himself in her scent. He missed kissing her sweet face as she wrapped her long, smooth legs around him, pulling him deeper into her. Smiling at the memory, he finished his smoke and went back then saw to his equipment and his steed when he got word the column was heading back to meet up with the army. They had spent most of the last 2 days raiding supply and communication lines south of Atlanta. That accomplished, they were supposed to meet up with General Stoneman's cavalry before moving on to Andersonville, where they planned to free the Union soldiers held captive there by the Confederates. But for some reason unknown to him, Stoneman never showed up. So after destroying hundreds of supply wagons and tearing up railroad lines, General McCook ordered the column to turn around and head back. Elijah understood the need to disrupt the enemy supply line. Still, it seemed to him that McCook liked destroying civilian property just a bit too much. Eli was more than a bit uncomfortable with McCook's cavalier attitude, encouraging the men to go after civilian private property. He thought they were supposed to be soldiers, not common bandits, remembering the sentiments he expressed in his last letter to Lizzie. This war will be over one day, he wrote, and we'll need to welcome these people back into the Union. But I'm afraid winning the peace will be much harder than winning the war with the tactics we're being encouraged to use. What will these people think of us in 100 years? Will they hate us, or will they see us as liberators? Such was the nature of his correspondence with Lizzie. Sure, they always exchanged sweet, loving endearments. Still, they often waxed philosophic about current events, just as they did when he was back home. Nothing was off the table. They discussed everything from politics to religion and even recipes as they sat in their parlor at the end of the day, enjoying the fire with a golden toddy and at least for him, a cigar. He missed that almost as much as he missed having her in his arms in bed. In several of their letters, they talked about how the war was dividing families. So many had soldiers serving on both sides in this conflict. He felt sad about that, and it hit home when he got word from her that his brother, Travis, was now with the rebel unit out of Texas. He wondered if he would be able to face off against his own brother if their units came against each other. Then he heard Travis's outfit was marching north into New Mexico. The Confederacy already had a hold on the southern half of the territory, so marching north and possibly west made sense to Eli. But he also had a feeling the war was nearing an end. At least Bill, his other brother, would be spared the horrors of this god-awful war, he thought. Bill had been shot in the leg by a weasel from New York named Jackson Abercrombie. As a result, he couldn't walk very far or very long and used a cane to get around. He still helped their father on his farm in Hard Rock, Texas, but it was a challenge. Eli snapped out of his reverie when the word went out and the cavalry mounted their horses. Things seemed relatively quiet until they reached a point just a few miles south of Noonan, Georgia. Then all hell broke loose as they came under attack by Confederate cavalry. Being part of McCook's advance guard, they were all but exhausted, but continued on to Noonan. Early on July 30th, they noticed the road was blocked by a trainload of Confederate soldiers. They dismounted and crept up to see what they were facing. "How many you reckon they got, Sergeant?" an officer asked quietly. "I'd say at least 500, Lieutenant," Eli said after scouring the area. "Probably a lot more behind them as well." Then they heard a loud, high-pitched whistle coming from the train. "Shit," the lieutenant said. "We'll be up to our necks in Rebs before you know it. We'd better take them out now while we can." "But we've only got 2 companies," Eli said. 2 companies of the 8th Indiana Cavalry, D and E companies, were McCook's advance guard and numbered less than 200 men. They were all excellent troopers, but the rebels had far more men in front of them. "But we've got the element of surprise," the lieutenant said. "Let's go." The cavalrymen mounted their horses, and before Eli knew it, the 2 companies of the 8th Indiana Cavalry were charging over the hill. The startled Confederates grabbed their rifles and met the incoming Union soldiers with a withering fire. Eli felt something slam into his chest with enough force to throw him backward off his horse. He fell to the ground knowing that he had been shot. So, he thought, this is how it ends. On the side of a road in Georgia. As his lifeblood left his body, he felt weak. His final thoughts were of his beautiful wife in Indianapolis, Elizabeth, and their last night together. "I'm sorry, Lizzie," he whispered as the darkness began to take him. Then I'd like to move, let me go down here. Okay, here we are. So that was the beginning of the story. That was how Eli lost his life. And this is, several years later, for about 40 years later, roughly. And this is when Elizabeth is on her deathbed. "All right, everyone, we need to clear the room now and let your mother get some rest," the nurse said as she shooed everyone from the parlor where Elizabeth now slept. Obadiah and Jed gave their mother a cheerful kiss, followed by their wives and children. Lizzie was weak and tired, but smiled as they each expressed their love and bade her a good night. Why is she sleeping in here? Jed asked the nurse on his way out of the parlor. Why not in her own room? She insisted, the nurse said something about her husband meeting her in here. She said Paul would meet her here, Obadiah asked. Yes, Mr. Jones, the nurse politely said. Please say her goodbyes and let her get some rest. They each did as the nurse asked and tearfully left the room. Lizzie lay in her bed and stared at the fireplace. She was nearly asleep when she noticed the shadows in the room change. Then she smelled the cigar smoke and looked toward the middle of the room. There he was, large as life, her husband, Eli. He put his lit cigar in his old ashtray and walked to her bed. He looked at the chair next to her bed and sat down looking at her. Hello, Lizzie, he said with a smile. Eli, she asked, shocked to actually see him. Is that really you, Eli? He smiled, and as he looked at her, she was even weaker and paler than the last time he saw her, but to him, she was as beautiful as the morning sun. It's really me, sweetheart, he said. Tears fell down her face as she looked at her husband. Oh, Eli, my love, I've missed you so much, she sobbed as she touched his face, giddy with the notion that she could finally see and hear her loving husband after all these years. I can touch you again, really touch you. After years and years of ghostly pecks on the cheek, I can feel you again. I know, and I've missed touching you as well, he said. You look like you've gotten some sun, she told him. I hope they're not working you too hard up there. He chuckled at that. Not too bad, he said. That badge, she said, looking at the Texas Ranger star on the shirt. Is that real? Yep, he said. It was given to me by Captain William Jesse McDonald himself. McDonald, that name is familiar. I read about him in a paper a while back, she said. Something about a raid in Brownsville, Texas. The article called him a man who would charge hell with a bucket of water. Eli chuckled at that. Yep, that sounds like Captain Bill, he said. So is it time, she asked. Eli nodded his head. Yes, sweetheart, it's time. Are you ready? I've been ready for a long time, my love, she told him. Oh, wait, I have to put something decent on and brush my hair. I'm such a mess. Eli shook his head as he laughed. What's so funny? I can't meet my maker looking like this. I'll die of embarrassment. He picked up a small mirror next to her bed on the table. No, sweetheart, you're just as beautiful now as the day we married, he told her. See? He held the mirror for her to look at, and her eyes grew wide as she gazed at the image looking back at her. She was much younger, her skin soft and smooth, her long blonde hair perfectly brushed. Her night clothes had become the beautiful, flowing dress she wore in their last picture. She looked at him, shocked. Does this mean? Yep, he said, it's time to go. Are you ready for me to take you home now? She smiled as she threw her arms around him. Oh, yes, Eli, I'm so ready to go home with you. He picked her up off the bed. I forgot how strong you were, or are, she said. You really do know how to sweep a girl off her feet. Only you, sweetheart, he reassured her. They looked into each other's eyes before their faces melted into the hottest kiss Eli had ever experienced. He felt a stirring he hadn't had in over 45 years as their tongues wrestled. Lizzie broke the kiss and looked into his eyes. I do declare you are just as incorrigible now as you were back in 61, Eli Jones, she said. And you were just as beautiful and sweet as you were back then, my love, he told her. She rubbed her nose against his and gave him a sultry look, one she often used before they coupled. Please, take me to your parlor, kind sir, she said softly, with a hint of a Texas drawl, and I promise I'll never leave your arms. Yes, ma'am, Eli said with a wide grin. They took one last look at the woman's body in the bed, her eyes closed, her face frozen in a satisfied smile. He stood up, holding Lizzie secure in his arms, and stepped toward the fireplace. And there's one last part in here where the kids discover her body. Jed, get in here, quick, Obadiah shouted when he went into the parlor. Jed, his wife, and Helen, Obadiah's wife, came running into the parlor to see what caused Obadiah to call out. "What is that smell?" Helen asked. Obadiah smiled, and Jed's eyes grew wide. "What?" Helen asked. "He was here," Obadiah said, looking at the still burning cigar in his father's ashtray. "Damn," Jed said quietly. "Who was here?" Helen asked. "Pa," Obadiah said. "Your father, the one killed during the war?" Jed's wife asked. "Yeah," Obadiah said. "This is a cigar he smoked. Ma doesn't let him see the ashtray. It was him, all right." "Which means Mother's gone," Jed said. Obadiah nodded his head. "Yep. Look at her face. She's smiling." "And look at this," Jed said, pointing to the area rug on the wooden floor. They looked and saw dirt had been tracked across it, and the trail of dusty boot prints went straight to Lizzie's bed. "And that chair's been moved," Helen said. "Nurse Rachel had it over there," she added, pointing to a spot not far from where the chair now sat. Chills went up and down their backs as they looked at each other. "Let's keep this to ourselves, okay?" Jed asked. They all nodded their heads in agreement and walked to Lizzie's bed. Tears fell down Jed's face, and the two women wept. Obadiah, however, smiled as he looked at his mother's peaceful face. Helen noticed and looked at her husband with a frown. "Aren't you sad your mother's dead, Obi?" Everyone looked up at him. "Of course," he said, "and I miss her terribly. But I also know she's with him now, and she's probably happier than she's been in years. It's okay, Helen. We'll see them again. Trust me on that." So anyway, that's that was those were the passages that I wanted to share with you guys. And like I said, the whole thing, your topic fell right.
That was wonderful. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yes, the topic you chose was just perfect, because that's what a lot of what this book is all about.
Wow. And so I've got to ask now, since you've given us some of the story, the kids seemed surprised, but not that surprised that a ghost had come in, that their father showed up. Are ghosts common in your world? Is that like a normal thing?
Well, no. And see, here's the thing. Eli really isn't a ghost. And this is where people get kind of confused.
Okay, lay it on us. Give us the spoilers.
Well, earlier in the story, Obadiah had been married to a woman who was cheating on him, and he had a plot of land in a place called Lone Pine, Texas, and his wife cheated on him with a guy in town who had all kinds of money and wanted to expand his empire, his own little personal empire. So Obadiah's first wife and her family, along with a lot of other people in the town, had plotted to take him out, to charge him with a crime he didn't commit, hang him, and that way his whatever land and property and cattle and what have you he had would go to his wife, and in turn his wife's father's empire would grow. Well, after the Wichita Falls bank robbery, which Eli took part in bringing down, he saw the wanted poster for his son, who at that time had grown into an adult. So Eli went to the town of Lone Pine to rescue his son. And that's when Obadiah learned that his father was well, he was still around. He was alive, definitely. You can put your hand on him. You can shake his hand. You can see him, interact with him, but he's not a ghost. You can't kill the guy because he's already dead. And so he was Eli was put into the Company B of the Frontier Battalion of the Texas Rangers for a period of 5 years to get training for what he would be doing later on. And so that's what that is all about. He rescues Obadiah. He brings down the bad guys. The bad guys get their justice through Adrustia, and so he brings Obadiah out of Lone Pine and manages to get him back to Indianapolis. And so this happened about, I'd say about 30 years after Eli rescued Obadiah. So yeah, and it goes from there. It turns out that the one of the sons of the guy who tried to bring Obadiah down later on, back during the 1920s, opens up one of the most notorious speakeasies in New York during the Depression, during the 20s and all of that. And Eli is tasked with taking care of him, which he does quite efficiently. So
awesome. It's very creative, and I want to say that I really like the relationship between the husband and wife that you read for us.
Thank you. The build up to his death, I forgot you were leading up to that. I was just following along the story, and I was like, oh yeah, and this character and his wife, and they're separated. Oh right, he's about to die. Oh god, it's like it totally you caught me off guard with it. Yeah, I forgot that was coming.
And it just hit a bit more, didn't it, Adam? Like it just hit a bit more because of that, I think.
Right. We knew who the character was. Absolutely, yeah. Once the death happened, you were already invested in him and his is he going to go back to his wife after? I've already forgotten. You've already told me he's going to die. You gave me that spoiler, but I'm. Oh yeah, does he make it back? Does he survive this? Oh no, he's dead. Oh great, yeah. It was good. No, so good. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes, I've got like 6 stories at Literotica about this guy, and the first one was written. Oh gosh, I think maybe 2 years prior to writing Justice Rides. And in that one, Eli meets up with his great grandson and helps him deal with a cheating wife. And just so you know, Adam, I'm kind of like you. There's a lot of naughtiness in my stories.
I could tell it was hidden in there. Yeah, no, I could tell it was going those directions. That's awesome.
It's probably not quite as naughty as some. But it's there. It's definitely there. But anyway, the very first story I wrote about this guy, he helped his great grandson deal with a cheating wife, and they later become quite close with each other. And so it's and the story goes from there. There's 6 justice stories on Literotica. And they all stem from this.
Awesome! Wow. Well, we shared your link at the bottom of the screen. Go ahead, Jules. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's all right. Do you have? Is there military history in your family, or is there?
Yes.
Have you been in the military? Or is there a reason why you've been like? There's a military focus for your stories.
Yes, my dad was in the Air Force for 20 years. He served in the Korean War, and he died here just a few years ago of a stroke. And I served 10 years in the Marine Corps. I'm what they call a Vietnam era vet. I served from 1975 to 1985, and all but one of my brothers served in the military as well. So yes, there's a lot of military history in my family.
There was also a question.
Yeah, because go on.
You go, Jules. No, that's all right.
I think it's a slight delay, isn't it?
There's a little delay. Yeah, it's fine. No worries. We're all over the world. We're in 4 different places around the world, so it's pretty crazy. Yeah.
You go, Jules.
I love technology.
Hey, go ahead, Jules, please.
Yeah. So military. I find who've either experienced military life or who've got family members who have been in the military or are serving tend to have much more of an interest in it than people who are not quite so much. I've got lots of military stuff in my stories because my husband served in the military for 22 years, and every male in my family has served in some capacity, whether it's the RAF or the Marines or the Army or whatever. So, yeah, for me, the military is quite an important part of it. It's a really interesting subject to research as well. And I've got quite military-based stuff going on in my stories as close as I possibly can. Bearing in mind that it's not quite using, guns. They're using swords and arrows and stuff. But I had to plan out a whole siege on a castle, which obviously uses actual military tactics. So I have found that lots of authors who write military things tend to have a link to military because it's an interest. It's a topic that is fascinating.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
That's all I want to say.
No, it's okay. I don't regret not spending a full 20, but I had a wonderful time when I was in, and in fact, one of the most memorable times I had in the service was during the winter of 1980 and 81, and I was myself and my unit. We were about 30 miles north of the Arctic Circle in Norway, and one of my most memorable memories was running across a group of British Royal Commandos. They were with the 40 British Marines. They were with the 40 Commando up there, and I had one of the troops that was with me was a corporal from New York, and he was from the Bronx. He was, everything you can. I mean, he was a good man, but he was, you could definitely tell the Bronx was in him. Okay, and we met up with these Royal Marines up in Norway, and one of them asked Harker. This is the trooper I was with. One of them asked Harker. He says, "Hey, mate, got a fag?" And of course, this was back in the 1980s, so that word didn't have the negative connotations that it does today. And my troop, he went, what? And I had to tell him, Harker, shut up and give the man a cigarette, will you? But yeah, that was
that exact discussion of language difference a couple weeks ago on the show, didn't we, Jules? We talked about something.
Well, I've heard it. Thing. Yeah, I remember sitting through a presentation given by a British doctor who served in the Falklands, and he said something that I'll never forget. He said, "The British and the Americans are a common people, separate or a people separated only by a common language." And
yes.
And I can believe it.
Yes.
I really
That's true. Absolutely. It's quite interesting. Some of the stuff I've learned about the language differences is that some of the stuff that we hold on to is that, well, it's not herb, it's herb. And we're quite precious about that because we think that it's our language. And
then we've also got Tom from Australia. So we've got
right. Oh yeah.
Actually, you're saying it correctly.
We make up all sorts of words.
Amazing. Well, Tom, would you like to do some reading?
It is really cool. Thank you, Larry. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would. I just want to kind of honor someone who is watching here. Harmony's just asked Larry earlier in the piece, where did you get your ideas from, Larry? Did you have to do a lot of research? I thought it might be great to let Larry do that, and then I'll jump in and read a few short sections from my book.
Totally meant to ask that question. Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Well,
yeah, thank you, Tom. Well, I get ideas from all over the place. So a lot of my ideas come from my twisted, warped mind. This one, the idea for justice, actually just came to me one night, and I woke up and I thought, so I just started exploring it, and it went from there. Yes, I do quite a bit of research. I do as much as I humanly can, especially if I'm researching about a place that I've never been or never seen. Sometimes I get inspired by a song that I might hear. There's a 2-part story that I did on Literotica that was actually inspired by the theme song for Star Trek Enterprise. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, and so I did that, and so yeah, there's a lot of things that inspire me. Sometimes I'll read something that somebody else has written, and it'll get me to thinking, would I handle a situation like that the same way, or would I do something a little bit different? And so yeah, there's lots of areas, lots of ways that I get inspiration.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Larry.
Thank you.
All right, so should we hand it over to you, Tom?
I'm on. All right, so hopefully I get the drill right here. My name's Tom Baldwin, or TN Baldwin. My series is called the Magicium series, which you can get on Amazon, and I'm going to read 3 sections. The first is very short. It's just introducing that idea of Junior's garden I talked about, that garden of memories where he goes through regrets. Now, this is just the moment where he first introduced it, where I first introduced that idea, and obviously it gets a lot more airplay as the novels go on. I then look at an example of a death that's that had quite a profound impact in my first book, and this is actually it's a death about one of where one of Junior's team dies, but Logan happens to be there as well, and so we see a little bit of what this means for these people when this particular person dies, and then the third one I won't talk about just yet because it's not till book 3, but it follows on in some ways from what's mentioned in the second reading. All right, so here is Junior's garden. Inevitably, as time and tasks slowed, his thoughts wandered into his tangled garden of memories. Shoots of lost children, still too tender to know what they might grow into, littered the ground. Dipak, Rhea, Zahira, Jasper, Sai, all of them. His eyes dropped as he passed Dipak's scarred tendril. He trundled past Blessing, a bold cypress, evergreen leaves stripped away. Limbs stretched their hands in entreaty, his final memory of her, while others bunched in fists. He tried to smile. Another image he couldn't forget. Another decision he couldn't let go of. His smile became even more forced at Angelo's baobab, flinging limbs in every direction. Yunjai, a dwarf tree with thick, compact vegetation ready to spring into action. Barnabas, an umbrella acacia with an afro of green hair fizzling over its ears. He reached the snarled mess in the centre. 2 trees almost identical in size, strangled by creepers of guilt. His son Asher, a fountain tree, trunk cleft in 2, foliage patchy. A moringa, his other son, Silas, more compact, less showy. Scabrous ivy, pressed branches, growing from the same root as the weeds infesting ashes. They choke tighter, a network reaching for every plant, murderous in the long term, yet offering Junior a strange comfort. Maybe it's time I tended the garden, he thought. So that's the garden itself. That's just introducing some of the characters, some of the people who he feels responsible for. Not necessarily all those are dead, but they reflect his the mistakes he's made. But many of them are as well. All right, so now we'll look at an actual important death that happens near the end of book 1, and then I'll introduce the little bit in book 3 as well that I'm going to read. "Look out!" bawled the man, crunching Logan and the woman, driving them backwards. A sensation of a rushing something fell past Logan as a massive shoulder jammed him against the floor, the woman underneath. His breath exploded. The woman struggled to free herself, a terrible wail escaping her lips. Logan's heart squeezed tight as he struggled to roll the man sideways. A ball, the giant fairy light, spun past, throwing light around the room. The blonde giant who had crushed him lay still. The huge disc Espadilla's chimera had cut in the cryolite sat on the floor, with a hole in the centre where the fairy light had been. The man's leg, severed above the knee, lay crushed underneath it. There was an awful lot of blood. The woman panted, ripping her filthy shirt and trying to stem the flow. In no time it was saturated in scarlet. "It's cut an artery," she whispered, fumbling the cloth around the stump. Logan looked around, seeking a way to help. He fixed on the blood pumping from the man's leg. He hesitated, years of training coming to the fore. He couldn't use someone else's blood to use magicium. That wasn't... Tears tracking down the woman's cheeks decided him. Logan focused, drawing on the power of the dying man. Sound faded as he wove a thick cord. He applied it to the wound, trying to plug the hole, trying by force of will to stop blood pumping from the huge limb. It was no use. He couldn't halt the flow. He could find nothing to hold on to, nowhere to connect his cord. Logan sensed there was a way to fix this, to save the man's life. It eluded him. The woman looked at Logan in wonder, then despair, as his focus and flex failed. He tried again, grasping for magicium in the air, in the walls, in his own body. Sweat beaded his brow. Another cord stretched. Logan forced it into the blood, flexing, bending his mind to quell the torrent, to block the entire vessel. He doubled the cord, tripled it, clutching for a way to stop, to delay, to halt that terrible stream. He tried looping, tying, binding, twisting. One last flex. For just a second, the rope held. His hands trembled. His brain tried bursting from his skull as blood seeped through the rope. It filled, pressed, pumped, then burst out, throwing Logan to the floor. The man groaned. The woman lifted his head into her lap. "Why the hell did you do that?" The man had turned paler than Logan would have imagined possible. "You know why." "You can't do this to me," she said, punching his chest, her eyes dry. "You were going to be a father." With a superhuman effort, the man raised his hand to her face. "You're having a baby?" She nodded. "We are." He gazed into her eyes with such intensity that Logan averted his own. The man grasped her hand one last time. "Then I am a father." The hand dropped. He fell still. Something broke in the woman, and she leant over him, hot tears splashing his face, whispering Marcus over and over. Logan knelt, feeling worse than useless, feeling the guilt of a bystander, of someone who could have helped, but had failed to act. He stumbled, everything around him hazy. "Snap out of it. You did act. You just didn't know what to do. You don't even know them. This woman had you pinned only moments ago." A small voice answered, "But he saved your life and you couldn't save his." So that's a really important part of the story. And of course, it's hard without a little bit of context there. But obviously, Marcus and the woman Greta are married, and they lose. They've been part of Junior's team, and then this guy comes in, saves Logan, and then Logan's unable to save him afterwards. Which I thought with Easter and whatever your beliefs, I think people mostly at least sympathise and empathise with the account of Jesus. And I think that's there's actually an important idea about sacrifice that comes through there. And so now we're actually going to go to book 3. So it takes a while, but we're going to go to book 3. And this is from Junior's perspective, not Logan's, but Greta has just had the baby. A doctor entered the room. She spotted Junior and came straight across. "Mr. Gittow?" "Yes, how is Greta?" He couldn't bear to ask about anything else. She's fine. Well, she asked me not to say. She wants you to come. And the little boy too, if you will. Just explanation, little boy's Amory, a troubled little boy who Junior is fostering. Amory had been listening and jumped to his feet, cuddling the bag to his chest. Junior sifted the doctor's words. She didn't seem concerned. Surely that meant, so the baby, it's okay? The doctor said, yes, mother and baby are fine. She hesitated, then added, Mr. Guitar, just wanted to thank you for all you've done for our city and our hospital. It's an honour to meet you. Junior looked at his latest fan. That's very kind of you, Doctor. The woman flushed. Dr. Ali, Sigrid Ali. She stopped and shook his hand before hurrying on, embarrassed. Amory looked at Dr. Ali as if she had grown two heads. He clutched Junior's sleeve. She was always the grumpy doctor. What? With the kids. We were scared of her. She's really strict. I didn't think you were scared of anything, teased Junior, looking at the bag, which was partly opened. He turned a little, trying to spot what was inside. Mr. Guitar, are you coming? Junior looked over his shoulder. Dr. Ali seemed to have let her hair out. Amory looked at Junior like he was a magician and shook his head. He tucked the bag closed and dragged Junior by the sleeve. They entered a dim corridor. Junior's premonition grew. He was certain Amory was hiding a stunner. He couldn't work out why he had brought it to the hospital. He had his most traumatic experiences here. It's probably just for protection. But Junior had to get it off him. If Amory wasn't so slow to trust, but that's the point, isn't it? They reached a door which Dr. Ali held open. Mrs. Fisher's through here. Junior was about to thank her. His senses tingled. Something about her behaviour. She's just like that reporter. His premonition had nothing to do with whether Amory had a stunner. This doctor was up to something, trying to force them to walk into... What? Maybe you should go first, doctor. Sorry? Oh no, we have a limit to numbers in this room. I'm afraid I'm going to have to insist, growled Junior, grabbing her by the arm and twisting it behind her back. What do you think you're... Quiet, barked Junior. As he did, a baby's wail came from the room ahead. Greta's bouncy voice mixed with the cry. There didn't seem to be anything wrong. Oops. Junior released Dr. Ali's arm. Doctor, Amory stared at him in horror. I'm sorry, it's been a rough... I'll leave you to it, Dr. Ali said, her face flaming. She swept along the corridor without looking back, tying up her hair as she went. Amory shook his head. Uncle Junior, if you didn't like her that way, you probably should have just said. Great, now I'm getting romantic advice from an 8-year-old. And to be honest, she wasn't unattractive. Thanks for the tip. Junior pulled open the door and walked inside. Greta sat cooing at a little whining package. Wan, but deeply in love. Myra glanced up. Hey, you guys, I thought I heard your elephant's trumpet out there, she said, thumping Junior's arm. Maybe try to stay quiet. You'll scare the baby. She scrutinised his face. Actually, you will anyway. Best get it over with. Greta looked at Junior, and the pain and loss she carried every day dropped away just for a moment. She pulled the wrap back from the baby's grumpy face. Meet Marcus Jr. Little Marcus. A boy? Well, Marcus wasn't my first choice for a girl's name. Told you he wouldn't get it, smirked Myra. Junior raised his eyebrows. The name's Marcus Jr., idiot. He's not just a junior Marcus. Named for you. Junior glared at Myra. Well, I'd better get one of the others. Back soon. Myra left before Junior could deliver his most scathing glower at her. Greta drew his attention. I named him for the best 2 men I know. Junior didn't know what to say. Would you like to hold him? Junior held out his arms. He had entirely lost the ability to speak. Little Marcus had a film of blonde hair, a ruddy complexion, and a passive scowl. Doesn't he look like his daddy? Asked Greta, a catch in her voice. Almost identical, murmured Junior, touching the baby's cheek with a rough finger. I have, said Amory, undoing his bag. I have something for the baby. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Junior stood, making the baby cry as Amory pulled back the flap of his bag. His hand plunged inside. Greta made an inquiry. Junior stepped between Amory and Greta. I should have acted sooner. I could have stopped this. Amory hasn't been himself since... He's never been himself. Junior turned his body, trying to shield Greta and little Marcus, clenching his teeth. Without warning, his premonition exploded around him. Magician raged through his body, trying to hurl him across the room as Amory shot once, twice, the stunt. Are you okay, Uncle Junior? Asked Amory. What's wrong? Asked Greta, placing a hand on Junior's arm. Oh, how lovely, she continued, looking past him. Junior turned, still protecting Marcus Jr. from Amory's outstretched puzzle. A little baby's wooden puzzle. Things clicked into place, much like those puzzle pieces. Oh. He went to the market that day when he disappeared and bought the baby a puzzle. He's been acting a bit strangely, Amory said earnestly to Greta. You should have seen what he did to the doctor. And we can hold it there. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yay.
Yay.
Again, awesome. Yep. Larry, your microphone is muted. Make sure you unmute yourself. Perfect.
There we go.
That was great.
Very good.
Pretty good.
Thank you. Look, it's probably a bit tricky without without enough context, I suppose. But tried to give something that was sufficiently accessible that we could at least see what was going on, and kind of that idea of the life replacing death that I've tried to draw out across 3 books there between between little baby Marcus and Marcus was that was a powerful part of what I thought reflected what we're talking about today. So
both myself and Harmony at the same time online commented about the way your wording was in the garden in his mind.
Yeah.
I loved that, and you're right. I couldn't tell if they were all dead people in the beginning, or when you explained afterwards that it was not all dead, but people he'd had encounters with and gone wrong. I thought it was magical. Oh, it was really, really awesome descriptions. The little branches that what they could have been. Oh, fucking awesome. Sorry.
Thank you.
It was really good.
Tell us what you really
Why are you going watching for swearing? We swear on this channel. It's fine.
We do swear on the show quite a bit sometimes, yeah.
You swore and you were like, oh, sorry. Like, oh, no, I can't swear. I'm not supposed to.
It's okay. I've actually heard those words before. You'll be surprised today.
Excellent.
Oh.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Well, I'll make a note of that. I wondered if I could jump in and read a little bit of mine, more because I'm interested to hear what Larry has to say about it. Because
oh my God! Yes, let's do that.
It's a military segment. It's obviously not Civil War, but it is military based, and I'm interested in, from a military perspective, what your thoughts are. If that's okay.
We would love to hear you read, Jules.
I agree.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
All right, so why don't you do the same thing? Put yourself on the screen, and we'll just wait here for you.
Okay, and so what you want me to read? There you go.
There we go.
Go for it.
Yeah. So I'll read a little bit. So this is from my second book of Shadow and Swords, and this is where Ray she's my protagonist, and she's angry and fierce, and she's angry at the whole world, and she wants retribution. She's on this path of just anger, and she's not seeking healing at all. The way that she feels that she can heal herself and the wounds is by killing as many things as possible. And so actually she creates an army and they plan to go to war. Now they want to go to the castle, which is where the children are being held, whilst they are sort of softened up, shall I say, ready to become child soldiers. And so they plan to lay siege to the castle, but when you lay siege, normally the sieges last months, and you know they create disease deliberately, and they starve the people out of the castle, but they don't have time for that. So this is the sort of very beginning of that siege, where it's everything being thrown at the castle. Okay, so I've kind of not really started at a specific beginning of a chapter. I've just kind of started midway through. Aim for the center of the building. That's where the troops train, and the rest most and rest the most. If you see any on the battlements, pick them off. Take your time and choose your shots wisely. Make every shot count. Yes, Commander, several archers responded. The title chilled me. I was no one's commander. I just wanted to survive this. I shifted weight again, rolling my shoulder. My sword was weighing more than usual today. As I looked down the line, Raven's eyes met mine. His face was tight and drawn, yet his eyes had a determination in them I had never seen before. He held my gaze for a moment, and I turned to face the keep, readying my bow. There'd be time for us after this battle. Several voices floated through the air. Henry and Huth were barking orders at their crew from behind the hill. They were beginning the assault. Fire lit the sky as several giant spheres ablaze arced above our heads from the war machines behind the tor. It caused the hazy mist residue to glow orange. The huge flaming boulders flew at their target, exploding into massive fireballs, engulfing the keep's frontage, followed a moment later by more, pounding the walls and bailey. The scaffold beams smashed into splinters or burst into flames as the rocks destroyed them, leaving only giant plumes of black smoke that billowed up toward the sky. Again and again they pelted the keep with monstrous flames which threatened to melt it through the stone, but it was built and remained strong. Bloody hell, look at that, said someone near me. If the war machines can't penetrate it, how are we to? Excuse me. It doesn't matter, someone with tattoos all over her hands uttered to him. We're only giving the others time. Calm yourself. Remember, focus on your breathing. Make every arrow count. You can do this, I nodded at them both, adding, ready? The woman cast me a nervous smile, which I returned, feigning confidence in mine, and she took an arrow from her quiver, resting it on her hand between her thumb and forefinger. Ready. The comforting sensation as I drew the silk back until just before the arrow formed soothed the churning in my stomach, and I raised my bow, aiming first at the keep, then lifting the sight of the bow so the arrow would travel farther and hit the centre of the courtyard of the building. From the corner of my eye, all the archers did the same along the line. Next to me, Kez stepped to my side and raised her bow, and we exchanged a tense glance. It was now or never. The full draw of the silk caused the aqua hue to glow, lighting up the intricate patterns that decorated the bow and streamed into the straight arrow that formed its strange coolness, burning the skin of my cheek as I held it there. Deep breath in, out, the bowmen followed with their cedarwood arrows, drawing their string back. My arms shook a little from the strain as I continued to hold the silk in overdraw. Breathe in, out. Loose, I called. The pink and purple sky darkened from the sheer number of arrows as they flew in a great arc toward their target, led by a single bright streak, blending in seamless harmony with the fireballs that continued their onslaught. Without further instructions, the archers continued to fire at the keep, darkening the sky as arrow after arrow rained down upon the castle. Keep firing. Take your time, each of you. It's not a race, I called along the line. Watch where your arrow goes. Aim for the windows or moving shadows. As I drew back the silk again, an orange glow formed at the top of the keep. Was it burning? My arms shook from holding the silk, but as I stared at the castle, the radiance grew brighter and brighter until the reason became apparent. The keep wasn't burning. It was a massive plasma cannonball headed straight toward us. Take cover! I screamed As it soared towards us, it disintegrated the arrows hurtling toward the castle midair, casting a streak of empty air in its wake. Archers scrambled away from the impact trajectory, but some were not fast enough. It dropped onto several archers, engulfing them in a fizzle that boomed, making the ground vibrate from the intensity of the sound. The archers that had leapt into the underbrush crawled out, joining Kez and me to continue the onslaught. "Keep firing!" I screamed as the archers returned to their positions. "They're not going to beat us!" Another plasma ball landed about 30 feet on either side and exploded with such force that it flung me to the side. Winded, I landed hard, causing my stomach to churn from the pain of the impact. While I forced myself to my feet, I rolled over to where I saw ahead of me it had killed many archers, their charred bodies scattered in its wake, leaving only tiny flames eating what remained. The ringing in my ears deafened me to the explosions, thundering as plasma ball after plasma ball landed, decimating whatever it was in its path. People were screaming. Kez was yelling at them to keep firing, and Raven was helping others to their feet, a reassuring hand on theirs. "We shouldn't be up here. We needed to get away from here." Dragging myself to my feet, I readied my bow again and loosed several more arrows. But then I fell to my knees as pain rippled across my stomach, causing my legs to give way, and I fell to my stunned. The survivors were pale. None were on the ground. Some were on the ground, crawling to safety, and others had burnt off limbs and were screaming in pain or crying. The world spun around me, so I grabbed a nearby rock to steady myself. So as I stared with a gormless expression at the carnage surrounding me. No, the Envoy could not win. The stakes were too high. Oh, I forced myself to my feet and stumbled back to my original position where the ground was charred and blackened from the plasma that singed the grass stems and dried leaves. "Today you are free! Remember that!" I shouted to the others, to anyone who'd hear me, to anyone who was left. "They cannot take that from you." Another plasma ball hit us. This time it was a bit further away, but its heat still managed to singe the hair on my arm. Again, I stumbled to my feet and a sharp pain shot through my arm up to my fingers, making each string drawing a challenge. I gritted my teeth and continued my volley as others did around me. But as I readied my bow again, the realization engulfed me like a wave. They knew where we were because of the light from my arrow. They could trace that through the entire arc, where the other arrows would only come into focus once they cleared the fog. The archers were dying because of me. I'm going to stop reading right there. There we go. You're all muted.
We're all muted. There we go. There we go. Yay! Marvelous, dense, action-packed.
I like the imagery.
Thank you.
I really did. I thoroughly enjoyed the imagery. Have you read C.S. Forrester? The Hornblower series?
Yes, I have read one of his.
Well, actually, I've read the whole series. That was one of the things. That was one of the series. I read that, gosh, when I was a kid, and that was. I tell the youngsters when I was in the service, ships were made of wood and men were made of iron. You know what I'm saying? So I'm but in all seriousness, I read those books when I was probably in my early teens, and that really turned me on to writing. I loved the way he described the battles that they went through. You see it on television, but until you read something like that, you can't even begin. But the imagery that you just presented reminded me a lot of what I read in those books, and I really liked it. I really did.
Thank you. I'm really interested in your feedback on that because obviously it's a military thing that I'm writing, and I mean obviously it's it's sort of fantasy military. It's not like full on military, but getting it right. I think is really important because you can write a battle scene, but if it doesn't make sense, it's not going to make sense to the reader. So
Right.
it does take quite a substantial amount of research.
Exactly. No, and I, like I said, the words that you use, the way you described it, the arrows, the flaming arrows flying through the air. I mean, I could see it in my mind as you were reading it.
That's what I was going to say. The ability to draw us in. Yeah,
exactly. And the war machines with the with the flaming balls, that the pitch that they used to use back then. I could actually see that happening in my mind as you read it, and I want to congratulate you on that. I thought you did very well with that.
Awesome.
Thank you. That means a lot.
One of the things I loved, Jules, was how you shifted between that narrative distance. I just thought you did that so smoothly throughout, where we could where we're seeing the up close, what the characters were experiencing up close, and then you were able to shift gradually out to the bigger picture of the battle and back. I just thought you manipulated that really well. I thought that was great.
Very well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That means a huge amount to me, because it's, I personally have never been in the military. Like I say, it's been something that's I'm very interested in, and I wanted to get it right, as in how a siege could potentially actually happen. So I had to come up with this whole battle plan, and how can you actually take an impenetrable castle in just one night?
Well, in all honesty, there's no such thing. If you study military history and read about the Battle of Verdun, read about the Maginot Line, and even going further back, like to the Crusades and so forth, you'll find that there is no such thing as an impenetrable fortress. The only case of that I have ever read about was, again, back to the American Civil War, the Battle of Fort Wagner, Battery Wagner on the Carolina coast, and that was with the 54th Massachusetts. It was a colored regiment from Massachusetts. It's one. If you've ever watched the movie Glory, that's the unit that it was about. With Matthew Broderick, but that battery, it was a Confederate battery, and the Union tried to take it over and over and over and over again, and they never could. They were never able to, and it was just there was a whole lot of things that conspired to make that happen. But if you read about that, or if you watch the movie Glory, you'll see what. And yes, it could happen in one night. It absolutely could. But as a general rule, there's no such thing as an impregnable fortress.
The fortress in this story, so it's basically built atop this hillock, and the rocks are they are like really hard, solid rocks, harder than diamond in the way that they are, just because it's on another planet.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a whole history there where humans kind of do crash land there, and over time they have to build stuff, and their war factions happen, and history kind of repeats itself, and they build castles that skip forward about 3,000 years. So we still have this castle standing that's now in use to create child soldiers. And you've got so normally sieges, if you go back to like the Crusades, they would coup on their arrows, and they would, especially if they had dysentery or cholera or anything like that, and they would fire those over, and they would allow the livestock to die, and then they'll starve them out, and they'll stop their water supply. They would they'll do undermining as well by digging underneath it, and they would set light to a whole load of pigs, or they'll have pigs underneath it, and then they'll set light to them, and then it'll collapse apart the castle. And there's a whole load of different things. But normally, because sieges take more than just one night normally, I know that there are like spikes in terms of where there are ones that didn't, but I needed this one to be like full on assault, so that, and actually they're just a distraction. So while they have a group that try and infiltrate inside the castle, try and get the children out. So whilst everyone else is fighting and they're distracted with the fighting, they can try and save the children. But yeah, it's I did quite a lot of research. I enjoyed the research element, and like so much about the Civil War, I get to hear about the Napoleonic Wars. My side,
Right. Oh yeah.
like my husband tells me about all of them, and he could tell you all the battles and what Wellington was doing and what Napoleon was doing, and yeah, it was
Well,
And
again,
this is all at the same time.
I want to congratulate you on the imagery that you put forward. I mean, it was fantastic. I loved it, and
Thank
and yes, I mean, I could see it happening as you were reading. I really could.
It's awesome when you come across a piece of writing that's really cinematic like that, and you just you see it in your head, like you're saying. That's such a wonderful feeling.
Exactly.
Thank you. Oh, you made me blush. Thank you. It's really, really kind of you. Oh, we're nearly at the end now. Adam, did you want to read a little bit from yours?
Sure. Why don't I read a little death in my book? Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, you know the drill. Did you want a moment just to find a piece, or are you ready to go?
I'm all set up. Yeah, I'm ready. Yep, that's great.
Go then. Here you go.
Cool. Hi again, everyone. I'm Adam Andrews Johnson, author of Mantis Variant and the sequel, Mantis Equilibrium. I'm going to read something from the beginning, not the intro that I was talking about with the cult and the child sacrifice, but another introduction for one of the other main characters who comes in chapter 3. So I'm just going to pick up from there because you haven't met this person yet, so it's a little backstory, and that's fine. So here we go. Chapter 3. At the very edge of Gate Town, outside the old base's entry, there stood a sun-scorched shack. A group of several shifts built it, and they made the tiny dwelling their home at the city's outskirts. Ilya was 19. The dry season lasted through the autumn, and the winter rains were finally started while she was out collecting supplies. The brief few weeks of wet weather were always a relief to the citizens of Teshin City, but Ilya did not leave that morning dressed for rain, and she returned soaked to the bone. The temperature was dropping, but she was unaffected by the cold. As Ilya approached the rickety structure with her arms and satchel laden with food and equipment, she scowled at the sight of her home. She and 4 others built the hovel over 2 years prior. The shack was hobbled together with driftwood and old rotted planks of decking, and the thing was getting worse for wear by the day. It looked as if it might collapse at any moment. She half wished it fell while she was gone. Her dilapidated home could barely be considered a hut, yet it housed their group of 5 shifts for the time it stood. Ilya lifted the tarp that served as her domicile's makeshift door, and she slipped inside. 2 young teenage boys were stretched out together on a pile of blankets. Both were infected with the blood corruption. One and then the other developed the virus a mere week earlier. The red sickness was more often than not fatal, and over the course of the previous several days, the boys' conditions only worsened. Ilya steeled herself against the loss of them. She knew it was imminent. Loss was a familiar feeling. Early into the second year as a group, the eldest member went out fishing in the harbor like he did countless times before, but he never came home. There was also another girl about Ilya's age, and she lived with them for almost 2 years, until she foolishly fell for a human. She loved him, but his affections were deception. Less than a month into what seemed to be a romantic courtship, her corpse was found headless in an alley. Ilya's short life was rife with loss. Even her parents abandoned her when it was revealed that their daughter was a shift. She was only 12 years old at the time. The cold rain now pattered down on the shanty's roof above her head. The water seeped in at the failing seams. It dripped from holes in the recycled boards that were not a problem during the brainless months. Ilya set everything that she carried into the driest corner, and she knelt on the floor beside the sick boys. Their wheezing breaths and fitful sleep brought a lump to her throat. One of the last symptoms of the blood corruption was described as madness, But for most ill people, the manifestation was more akin to a failure of their cognition. During the previous night, the two boys woke in the darkness, and Ilya was startled from her sleep by the sound of them talking. Their speech was slow and slurred, and they mumbled incomplete thoughts and partial sentences before fading back into fevered unconsciousness. Kneeling beside their makeshift bed, Ilya covered her mouth and choked back a sob. She knew their end was near. One of the boys was barely breathing. With the rain falling, Ilya's tears flowed. The gloomy light from the gray sky barely illuminated the inside of the shack, and Ilya leaned against one of the walls. She stared at the boys in the gloom and did not move as the younger one started convulsing. He foamed at the mouth and went rigid. His little arms and legs quivered against his sides, and he took a final gasping breath before falling still. Ilya let out a quiet wail to herself, but then she rose and dragged his body from the hut. He was small and frail, and outside she scooped up his corpse. She walked the few blocks to the edge of the gray shallows, and there she left his body to sink in those cursed waters that were poisoned by their history. The boy disappeared beneath the surface. Ilya turned and headed back into the neighborhood. The winter drizzle hid her tears. Once inside her hut again, she looked at the final remaining member of her Neo family. The child lay alone, and Ilya could not recall a moment when the two boys were apart. She stared at his sallow skin, his feeble frame, and she gritted her teeth as fresh tears burned her eyes. Ilya peeled her sodden shirt up off her torso and over her head. She dropped it to the ground with a wet flub. Her trousers were also soaked, and she slid them down her hips to her legs, kicking them from her feet. She removed her bra and panties and abandoned the soaked undergarments as well. For long minutes, Ilya stood naked above the dying boy, watching his labored breaths. She was unmoving and steady, but her mind was twisting and trying to arrive at a conclusion. The food Ilya purchased while out earlier that day was not meant for either of the boys. They both had been rapidly progressing along the course of the disease, and neither imbibed food nor drink over the previous 2 days. Now alone with him, Ilya watched the boy twitching in his sleep, and she allowed her eyes to close. She took a steady breath, reached into her satchel, and her fingers wrapped around the hilt of her dagger. It unsheathed with the hushed ring of steel sliding along the velvety interior of the scabbard. She knelt beside him, did not say a word, and with one fell thrust, Ilya jabbed the blade into his left side and yanked it back out again. The boy's blood did not erupt, it did not spray, but his life flowed out from the wound she inflicted in his heart. The red liquid poured onto the floor where Ilya knelt, and it coated her shins. She stayed beside the boy with her hand on his chest through his brief death throes. His eyes did not open as his life left him. And I'll stop there because then she leaves, and there's no ceremony for either of the boys. It's just they died because they were suffering, and she's gone through a lot of death already. And then I go on to tell you about her past, when her parents were horrible to her and kicked her out, when she was taken in by a kindly old lady who then shortly died after. She's gone through a lot of horrible stuff. She was homeless on the streets for a long time before she built this crappy little hut that she lived in, and that was the end of her. So yeah, thanks for listening.
It's very good. Larry and Tom, you're both muted.
Yes, thank you.
Very good.
What an upbeat way to finish. I mean, yeah. Well.
And then they were dead. That was it.
We started off alive and now we finished with death. It's quite apt, isn't it, for our theme tonight?
It's good. And I like this introduction for her because it's so dark and it's just misery. And I think the chapter ends with a line about her never having felt lucky in her entire life and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just she's just in misery right now.
There wasn't a moment of hope in that. Like there was nothing. It was
no.
It really did. Yeah, the mood just permeated the whole thing. It was, yeah.
Awesome. That's exactly what I wanted you to feel.
Very grim. Very rough.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, there was definitely an undercurrent of sort of almost dread, hopelessness, just grim, but also determination and maybe a little bit focus as well that kind of drove forward. So Yeah, that was really good, really powerful. Really liked it.
I-
You write really well. So,
Yes.
go on.
I kind of like that you actually a lot of writers try to put a little moment of false hope or something like that in there, and I kind of like that you didn't. That there wasn't a single moment where I didn't think both of these children are going to die.
Right.
And that's a it's a terrible thing, and we should feel that it's a terrible thing. And you didn't you didn't try to paint that in a different way. I really liked that in a way that horrified me.
I start each book with a bunch of deaths. The cult that I mentioned before, this Ilya going through all these deaths and her little past and what she goes through. The second book, I start out, I slaughter an entire village, a whole little village. Everybody's dead except for one person at the end of the first chapter. Everybody's dead.
I love how we become serial killers and mass murderers, don't we, when we write? It's just like there's a people. Like, what's the most crucial way to make this person die?
That's an amazing question. How many people have we killed in our books? That is,
yeah, that's a good question.
Wow, that's a really good question.
I've lost
Yeah, I've actually
probably around
nuked
half
a
a
few
million
of mine.
people.
Your guess is 500,000, Jules? That's impressive. That's impressive. You probably have us all beat.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't write every single one of their deaths, but quite about several 100,000 were killed in battles and stuff like that. So yeah.
Wow.
Oh yes, I am a mass murderer. Yay!
Everyone needs a hobby.
Like the Eddie Izzard thing. Your diary must look odd. Death, 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 death. Lunch, death, 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 death.
Well, it's quite good because the book that so Adam and I are actually doing a collaboration at the moment, and there isn't any at the moment in that, which is quite unique compared to the books that we both of us have written ourselves, which I just like you've just quite aptly described, just death, a break, and then death.
Oh, well, this was a great show. This was a wonderful, wonderful discussion.
Yeah,
This was great. I know we're getting close to the end,
It's
but
been amazing.
it was wonderful. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, thank you both of you so much.
Thanks for being here on Easter Sunday, and Tom, I think it's Monday morning where you are.
It is Easter Monday. It's about to reach 7 a.m. So.
Whew, brutal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us so early in the morning. That's absurd.
Over the
Sorry, what was that?
Do you have like a bank holiday weekend? Or
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we get a 4-day weekend as well. So I'll cope. Yeah, my wife might want to be near me today, but that's fine.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having us on. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome. We would love you both to come back again. Be guest authors here.
Sounds
Please
great.
delve into another become a regular now.
Yes, that'd be lovely. Yeah, absolutely. It's been an absolute pleasure having you both here. Now I've got a little announcement. On the 21st of this month, we're going to be doing a pre-recording of our After Dark show.
Oh yeah,
which is our grown-up show that we've started.
In case our topics aren't grown up enough on this show.
I was thinking that.
Well, it's got like more segments, it's like specific segments, and it's got us drinking and us doing a lot more swearing and talking about a lot more dark things and doing news and current affairs and things like that. So it's a slightly different feel to this. But it is fun. We did one before and we loved it. So we're going to try and do it so it's a more of a regular thing. It's just trying to sort of fit it in. We've just swapped our book slam from a Thursday to a Sunday to accommodate people around the world like yourselves. And it means that it's a bit more of a relaxed time. So on a Sunday evening.
Right. Yeah. This show is way relaxed and we keep it super casual. And the other show that we film in advance is more structured, and we have a plan for what we're going to do about that. Yeah, we like to keep this one loosey goosey and chilled out and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's coming. So look out for that. We're also doing a competition. Which did you want to introduce it, Adam?
Sure, real quick. I'll try and do this quick. Yeah, we've got a writing competition that we're doing through Jules's publishing company. We're celebrating a creativity. We want you to write something 1,000 words or less, either poetry or a short story or anything that fits into that length of words. We want to have 3 elements so that when we publish the winners, that they all have these 3 elements in common. We want a wolf in everybody's writing, a magnifying glass, and the outer rings of Saturn. Now that can be as whatever you want them to be. They don't have to be specifically those 3 things. That can be drinks on a cocktail menu. It can be references in a space travel journey that you're flying through the universe. It can be anything you want. We want to celebrate your creativity. I know people use the symbolisms in poetry constantly. So anything you can do, use a wolf, a magnifying glass, and the outer rings of Saturn. Those 3 things in your writing. Submit it to us. The email competition, danucompetition@gmail.com at the bottom of the screen. That is the place to send it. We're asking for a $10 submission fee just to pay the readers who are spending their time enjoying what you're writing. And other than that, it's open submission. We don't have a close date right now because we're trying to accept as many entries as possible so that we can have a good volume. We're going to publish the winners. They're going to be in a book, and when it's out, we're going to donate 15% of the proceeds to the Trevor Project, which is an LGBTQ nonprofit for LGBTQ suicide prevention, which is a major problem in the world. So we love them and we've supported them before. So yeah, submit your work to the competition and be part of it. Yay! That's the story.
Absolutely. Well done. That was a lot. Thank you so much. And anyway, I'm going to close it because I've just had a really, really good time with you guys, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you for the chance again.
So you're very welcome.
You.
You're very welcome. Yeah, no, you're very welcome. Yeah, we want to build a community here. We want to have an open community of people with all genres who feel safe and secure, knowing that we love you all and we think you're amazing, and to just keep writing. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.